Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brent Pry, Virginia Tech, heading on the road to open up the 2024 college football season against the Vanderbilt program that, Dill, you talk about two programs that kind of just trending in the opposite direction. Virginia Tech, we've been buying stock in this program pretty much all offseason. Vanderbilt, probably not so much. Want to dive into this matchup, talk about a few keys, obviously give a game prediction with Virginia Tech heading on the road to play Vanderbilt. But Dill, you make no mistake about it, especially with a team like Florida State losing week 0. Like, this is one of those teams in Virginia Tech that you look up mid-October, end of October, and say this team is thickly in the hunt for an ACC championship. We both certainly wouldn't be surprised. Really excited to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, number one, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. The best part about doing these kind of game predictions is hearing from you guys, chopping it up about ball. So appreciate y'all. Let it fly in the comment section if y'all do enjoy the content. Consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, without further ado, let's start with this Virginia Tech offense going up against the Vanderbilt defense that was 130th in points per game last year. My big takeaway and what I'm most excited for Virginia Tech is towards the back half of the 2023 season, you really saw this offense kind of find their identity with Kyron Jones at quarterback, specifically running the football. And they're going up against the Vanderbilt defense that was not good stopping the run last year.
And that's kind of fundamentally what I'm looking for is, can Virginia Tech this year start beating the teams like Vanderbilt, like an Old Dominion, in a way that I think makes me think that they're a much better team. It's like last year, it felt like they let teams hang around that they had no business letting hang around. I want to see this team play in a physical nature, in a dominant nature, especially up front, because that's the one unit I think from the offensive standpoint that I'm really looking at and I think needs to take a step. Have a lot of guys back. I want to see that unit be able to impose themselves on a defensive unit that they certainly should have their way.
Well, that was kind of my big takeaway from the end of 2023. And what makes me just kind of a believer in this Virginia Tech program is you've seen the player development take place. Like that offensive line when Brent Pry first took over in 2022, disaster. Significantly better in 2023. And I would even argue that you saw that unit start to play better as a whole as kind of throughout the 2023 season. You look at the last two games against Virginia and against Tulane in the bowl game, ran for 250 rushing yards against Virginia and then 360 yards against Tulane. Like, this was a team that from a rushing attack standpoint, started to put it together. Now we think Virginia Tech's going to have some success running against the Vanderbilt defense that gave up 5.2 yards per carry last year. There's 122nd in the country. Where I see Virginia Tech, kind of taking that step on offense is if Kyron Jones and a trio of wide receivers that we think are very good can kind of marry that elite rushing attack that we know they're going to have with a downfield passing attack that can manufacture some explosive plays. Look, Kyron Jones has all the talent in the world to push the ball down vertically down the field, make those kind of throws. You didn't see it as consistently as you wanted to in 2023. If he takes that step going into 2024, I think that's the peak of what this Virginia Tech offense can look like in the 2024 year.
And Vanderbilt's certainly not the measuring stick to kind of make that assessment. But again, I don't think we ever saw Kyron Jones play an extraordinarily clean game when it comes to the passing attack. And not to say he didn't have his good games. He obviously had some games where he was able to make some big plays in the passing game. But again, just quarter to quarter to quarter, be really, really consistent, miss almost zero throws. Again, when Virginia Tech's playing this type of game, that I think if they're going to take the next step as a program, it needs to become so routine that they play an unbelievably almost perfect game. I think that's kind of what I'm looking for from Jones, because that'll make me think like, all right, he's starting to get really confident, because that's like the one thing I feel like he didn't quite have was him just being ultra confident.
Confident as a pocket passer. I would totally agree with that. I think that's a great take. And you look at Jones last year, you saw the flashes. There's a reason we're high on this kid. Like, there were some things, like some throws that would make your jaw drop. We know he has that talent even when he was coming out of high school when he first committed to Baylor. And now can he put that together consistently? And what makes me kind of feel good about it is you go back to last year, like he wasn't the quarterback one in the fall camp. I mean, this was you saw a transition period. And I think you saw as the season went on, like Jones get a little bit more confident as the quarterback one in this Virginia Tech offense. And if they can kind of continue that momentum into the 2024 season, that's what you're looking for. And again, these wide receivers, I think that's the part nobody talks about. Everyone wants to talk about this Virginia Tech rushing attack and how much return and production they have. Hey, that's what makes us believers in Virginia Tech as well. But they have legitimate NFL talent at the wide receiver position as well. They'll go to the defensive side of the football, I think, for Vanderbilt on offense, I guess you'd say. Not really sure what the quarterback situation is going to be. They brought in 2 transfers, both of which are very good athletes, right? Diego Pavia, coming from New Mexico State. He's a wrestler out of high school. This dude is tough as nails. He's a gamer. I think he can win some football games. And then you have Nate Johnson, who was, a coveted recruit, is a very, very good athlete outside the pocket. We're not necessarily sure who's going to be the quarterback one.
One thing I know, though, Vanderbilt's going to give Virginia Tech's linebackers a chance to prove that they've maybe taken that step. Because, again, we kind of look, I think you're comfortable with that defensive line. The interior probably needs to still prove itself to an extent, bring in a couple of transfers, have a few guys back. I think that unit should be pretty solid. But to me, again, you want to see these linebackers take on a little bit more of that identity of what I'd expect from Brent Pry and be ultra physical, because that was a unit that – it didn't always play that way. They weren't always flying downhill and hammering guys and trying to make plays at the line of scrimmage. And again, I think Vanderbilt's going to give them a steady dose of the rushing attack. Last year, they tried to play that pro style. When you have the talent that Vandy has, you just can't do it that way. You see them go out and get 2 quarterbacks who are going to do something totally different. Vanderbilt's going to give that versus Virginia Tech team a chance to prove their linebackers are legit.
Well, yeah, I think they're going to run the football a lot. Like, you have 2 dynamic quarterbacks. You have a really good sophomore running back in Cedric Alexander. You kind of hit the nail on the head. And we've talked about this in the offseason. Let's start with Kelly Lawson first. Kelly Lawson's a freak show, arguably one of the most physically gifted linebackers that we'll see in the ACC. And Dill, we've been banging the table for this kid going back to the 2022 year. You've seen the flashes, but I don't know if you've seen the consistency that you want to see from Kelly Lawson. Then you go to Alan Tisdale last year, Dill, 4.5 yards averaged at the tackle. Like, these linebackers just weren't being difference makers. They were making some tackles, but they weren't really making their tackles at or behind the line of scrimmage. You're bringing Sam Brumfield from Middle Tennessee. I think he could be a difference maker. And if he's a difference maker at that off-ball linebacker spot, maybe allowing you to get a little bit creative in terms of how you use Kelly Lawson, because that's a kid that you can get creative with in the front 7. That is an area where I see Virginia Tech take that step. Now, you mentioned
also setting the tone. I mean, a little bit bigger, a little bit more size than what I think we've seen from the Virginia Tech linebackers over the past few years, and maybe establish some of that like thumping attitude. Just take on some of that Brent Pry energy that we kind of saw from those Penn State defenses.
One thing I do want to mention, Aeneas Peoples on the inside. The more you read about this kid in fall camp, the more and he was phenomenal at Duke. I mean, this was a guy that we knew was going to be a hot commodity in the transfer portal. Virginia Tech was able to get it done. That's a guy that can be a difference maker for Virginia Tech on the inside. You want your linebackers to play better. One of the best things you can do for your linebackers, get a really good defensive line in front of them. Hey, we know the edge rushers are going to be good. They sacked the quarterback 10.2% of the time. That was number 3 in the country. The interior defensive line, if they become a little bit more dominant, I think you see the linebacker play take a step in the right direction as well. Look in the secondary, it's maybe just going to hold this secondary to some higher expectations. I look at this Virginia Tech secondary and say it has the ability to be one of the better units, not only in the ACC, but in the country. I'm not sure if Vanderbilt is going to challenge this Virginia Tech secondary in any sort of significant way. That being said, you want to see them come out, kind of put the clamps on these Vanderbilt wide receivers. They do have a guy in Loic Fungi for Vanderbilt who I think's really good coming from Texas Tech. Dill, let's get into the pick here. Virginia Tech road favorites, 13 points. I know where I'm going with this. Where are you going with this?
I think this is a preposterously low line. And frankly, if Virginia Tech's going to make me really think they're going to be a legitimate competitor for the SEC or the ACC this year, I think they got to beat this team by 20 plus minimum, because that's kind of where, again, and that might be lofty expectations for Brent Pry this early in his career at Virginia Tech, but
I don't think it is. I don't think this is year 3. We are seeing Brent Pry kind of get his fingerprints all over this program. I don't think that's lofty at all. I look at inside of 2 touchdowns. I'm kind of with you here. Give me Virginia Tech to cover the points. I know it's week 1. I know they're on the road, but I look at this Vanderbilt team and say, I don't know if there's a single matchup on the football field that I like Vanderbilt in. I don't think Vanderbilt moves the football in any significant extent. And then you look at Virginia Tech and say, They should be able to run the football. Vanderbilt was very poor. They gave up a 70% completion percentage last year. That was the bottom in the country. I think Virginia Tech's going to be able to move the football. Give me Virginia Tech as well. And Dill, I think you summed it up best. Like, you want to see Virginia Tech kind of make a statement. Week 1 against Vanderbilt, kind of solidify all the hype that's around this program. We'll shut it down there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.